A small park demonstration turned widespread anti-government protest. The wave of unrest in Turkey continues, now drawing comparisons to the Arab Spring. For 3 days, protesters in Taksim Square have clashed with police. It began as a protest over government plans to demolish an Istanbul park and replace it with a shopping center. But due in part to a heavy-handed police response, it grew overnight to protests in more than 50 Turkish cities. As the protests escalate, some recall a familiar scene, pointing to the revolution that kicked off in Egypt's Tahrir Square back in 2011, questioning whether this unrest is on the heels of some sort of Turkish equivalent of the Arab Spring. The Guardian dubs the protests an Occupy-style movement, pointing to the use of tear gas and chemical sprays by police, who have begun setting fire to the tents where demonstrators were sleeping. Protesters have taken to wearing homemade gas masks for protection. At the center of the protests is Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's come under pressure for being too authoritarian, now 10 years into his regime. He recently rejected the notion the protests are in any way a Turkish Spring. Erdogan has backed down from plans to demolish the park, but a writer for Commentary magazine says his decision to put a mosque there instead is more proof he's out of touch. His announcement is the equivalent of sticking up his middle finger at Istanbul's secularists and liberals. While there are plenty of comparisons to be had, a writer for Al Arabia says the situation is far more nuanced than first meets the eye, adding most of the Arab Spring comparisons are coming from journalists with little knowledge of Turkish politics. One cannot possibly analyze a situation in Turkey by staring out their hotel window in Istanbul. I went to Disneyland once. That doesn't make me Tinkerbell. An expert on Turkey for the Brookings Institute tells the BBC the coverage is lacking some needed perspective. The motivations behind Taksim Square are different from what we saw in Tahrir Square.
It's basically a uprising against an authoritarian regime that was in power for 30 years. The Turkish government, despite all its imperfections, has been democratically elected.
More than 1,000 people have been arrested at the 90 demonstrations across the country. Several hundred injuries have been reported. For Newsy, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn. Multiple sources, a broader view.